that? Excellent. We'll just give people about another minute to come. I've got two different clocks. One says we're at 10:59 and one says we're at 11:01. So we'll give the 10:59 the benefit of the doubt. And we will give everyone just a half a second or half a minute rather to join us. Again, I would love to know where you are from. And I would also love to know what your background is. So if you are comfortable just giving me a country or a state or a province or whatever, that would be great. And it would also be lovely if you would just let me know if you've got any background in iridology already. That would be really good. It would help me to be able to tweak this on the fly to make it even more beneficial to you. Today we are talking about how to practice safe iridology. We're talking about scope of practice. It might sound boring, but it is one of the most important topics you need to master as an iridologist. Hello, and eye shining. Good to see you on Instagram. Thanks for joining us. We'll be getting started in just about 30 seconds now, as we're just waiting for the rest of our people to get logged on. And today, again, we are talking about how to practice safe iridology. We're talking about scope of practice, and simply put, it is one of the most important topics that you need to know once you have mastered the skill of iridology, because not understanding your scope of practice can land you in some pretty serious trouble. All righty. I think we are going to get ready to rock and roll here and just make sure that I've got that. Yes, yes. All right. So let's talk about this because this is super, super important. I would love it if you would, again, just let me know who you are, where you're from, and what your background is so that I can tweak this on the fly. If you've been hanging out with me for any length of time, what you already know is that I've got two missions in my business. Number one is to mentor practitioners who are struggling in their businesses because they spend their own time unpaid and after hours creating client programs. And number two, my second mission is to teach the truth about iridology and its proper application in a wellness practice. So with that in mind, we are going to be diving into our topic. And I just want to, we're going to talk about what we can diagnose with iridology. We're going to talk about some various things. So, and just before we do that, I do want to introduce myself because that could be important as well. And then we will pop back to what the course is, what today's webinar is going to entail. So I'm a master herbalist, a natural nutrition clinical practitioner, a certified iridologist, and an IPA certified comprehensive iridology instructor. I have been in the wellness industry for over 4 decades now, and I've written many books. My books were all self-published. They included topics like Pregnancy Naturally, The Herbal Birth Kit Handbook, Healthy Kids Naturally, The Essential Guide to Nature's Sunshine Products, Biokinesiology and Color Therapy Level 1 and 2, and the textbook called Confident Nutritionist Dynamic Iridology. I've also created and taught many courses. I created and taught Herbology Level 1, which was 20 hours of herbal training for home use. Herbology Level 2, which was another 16 hours of advanced herbal training for home use. Biokinesiology and Color Therapy Level 1 and 2 to teach people the art of using the body to ascertain strengths and weaknesses, as well as how to use color to enhance strengths and weaknesses. Hello, Eye Shining. Hello, Mirabar. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us. I've also designed and taught prenatal classes. For a few years, I was a certified antenatal educator through the ICEA. I enjoyed that tremendously. I also have designed and do currently now teach Dynamic Iridology Assessment System, which is an IPA approved iridology course that covers all of the curriculum for IPA Level 1 and IPA Level 2. So stay with me till the end of the workshop and we'll talk a little bit about what's coming up as far as courses and programs. All right, so when we are looking at the concept of iridology, we want to be aware that we cannot diagnose and we cannot prescribe, right? To diagnose is to name a disease. So if you want a diagnosis, you would go to a doctor, either a medical doctor or an ND. They would run tests, they would analyze the test results, they would name a disease, and then they would create a treatment protocol from the disease name oftentimes. That's not a bad thing to do, but we've got to remember that the stats suggest that there are errors on at least 20% of diagnoses. Autopsies done have proven that when the person died, their diagnosis was wrong 20% of the time. And that was reported in the British Medical Journal, volume 22, issue supplement 2. So maybe we don't want to name diseases. Maybe we, because, you know, the other thing we've all heard is that if often when a diagnosis has been attached to somebody, they can't shake that diagnosis. And no matter what they do, no matter whether it's right or wrong, everybody else who looks at those records assumes that it is correct. So we need to instead ask the question of what value does iridology have in assessing a client, in assessing our client needs, and in creating wellness programs. So let's take a look at this whole big question. We're going to look at many, many eyes today to look at how iridology will help us as we are assessing our clients' needs. And again, I'm welcoming questions and interactions, so please let me know that you're there and interact with me. Hello, Betsy, Jamie, and Martha. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us live on the webinar. So when we look at, we're going to look at 6 specific cases today and talk about what we see in the eyes and how that informed the decision of what recommendations to make for these clients. I work with a lot of children. This are the eyes of a young boy, 10 years old, who came to me with a diagnosis of ADHD, and his parents were really trying to keep him off Ritalin, off the meds. What I have noticed in my many decades of practice is that most people who are diagnosed with ADD or ADHD have these rings in their eyes. These rings are called contraction furrows. And many of them also have these lines, which are called radial furrows. Now, so anecdotally, most children who have the diagnosis, most people who have a diagnosis of ADD or ADHD have contraction furrows. Not all people who have contraction furrows have a diagnosis of ADD or ADHD. So what do these markers suggest to us? Hello, Kadri, good to see you. What these markers suggest to us is that this person, their body functions in the sympathetic nervous system, which means they're always ready for the next crisis. They're always ready to leap to an emergency situation to help resolve it, or to panic, or to freeze, right? Fight, flight, or freeze. These people really spend time in that high reactive field. That means that they typically burn through their B vitamins, vitamin C, calcium, and magnesium very quickly. When they are properly nourished for their needs, they like to have a to-do list. They like to have a direction to what they're doing. They like to accomplish things. They don't waste time well. Now, it's important to remember that this set of markers, the contraction furrows and the radial furrows, not enough to make a diagnosis of ADD or ADHD. And we couldn't make a diagnosis like that anyways, unless we are licensed medical practitioners. But these markings lead us to want to ask specific questions. And these questions help us to assess how much time this person spends in the sympathetic response. Therefore, how much time they spend not attending to the thing that they should be attending to. So we want to ask questions like, what are this child's sleep patterns like? How does he handle stress and frustration? Does he have anxiety? Is he responding to situations with anxiety? What is his favorite method of learning? Is he more audio? Does he want to hear things? Is he more visual? Does he want to see things? Or is he more kinesthetic? Does he want to get his hands in there and get dirty with it? Does he want to experience it? Typically, when I see people who have these contraction furrows and radial furrows, they often are much more prone to having disrupted sleep patterns. They are prone to getting stressed very easily when they're not nourished properly, very prone to anxiety. They don't filter stimuli well, and they are often kinesthetic learners. They learn best with putting their hands to the material. So with this young boy, we needed to do some dietary corrections. His diet was way too high carb, not enough protein. We needed to give him more kinesthetic experiences. Most classrooms are not designed for the kinesthetic learner. They're set for audio and visual learners. They are not set for kinesthetic. So we needed to get permission from his teacher to have him put a Gumby or a Pokey or a Scoosh ball inside his desk. Do you know what a Gumby and a Pokey are? Do you remember the cartoon? Am I dating myself there? All right. A Gumby or a Pokey there were opposable figures, but not the articulated joints like action figures have now. They were soft rubber things that had wire in them and you could bend them around. And so we wanted this young boy to have things that he could reach into his desk and maneuver things without looking at them, because if his hands were busy, his mind could focus, right? So this is the kind of person who would be good as a trainer in a gym when he grows up. He'd be great at landscaping and doing that physical work. He would be great at doing surveying. He would be great in a school as a teacher, because he's going to be more kinesthetic in his teaching and he's going to be able to reach more of the children who are ADD, ADHD. Aren't we seeing an epidemic of ADD, ADHD? Hello, Rendion. I hope Rendine, good to see you. And Nina, good to see you. Thanks for joining us on Instagram. And so when we see those things, we know that we want him to be more hands-on with what he's doing. Now, there's a lot of other things that contribute to the imbalances that lead to ADD and ADHD. And just seeing these markers gives us a huge understanding there. You know, the need for the B vitamins, the need for the vitamin C, the calcium, the magnesium. And then I just know from years of experience that they need a better protein balance in their diet. So Iridology helped me to understand this young boy's chemistry, to then understand both physically and emotionally, mentally, so that as we understand that, we can then make very targeted recommendations for things to change in his diet and things to do with his supplements. Interesting story about this young man. His mother broke her ankle a couple of months after we had started working together. And so she was not able to do anything physical, had to keep her foot elevated, and she was bored out of her mind. She couldn't go to work. This was before the lockdown, so she wasn't set up to work online. And she asked her son one night, do you want to play Old Maid? You know, that card game, Old Maid. And he said, sure. So they played a game, and that was great. And then he said, Mom, can we play again? And that was great. So they played again, and they got halfway through a third game before he got bored. Mom sent me an email saying, this is absolutely a miracle, because normally he'd get about halfway through one game before he'd be wanting to wander off and do something else. The fact that he made it through 2.5 games was such an improvement. And we had just done the appropriate dietary work, supported him with some liquid B vitamins and some good calcium, and it made a huge difference. And we knew to do that because of what we saw in his eyes. So did you notice I did not tell him he had ADD or ADHD. I simply taught them about these contraction furrows, suggest he needs more B vitamins, vitamin C, calcium, and magnesium. And from there, we went with recommending specific ways to get that. Here is one of my female clients. I do a lot of work with infertility, and she came to me because she had fertility issues. Now, we're going to look at a few of these cases. Each of the women that we're going to talk about in the next few cases had a diagnosis of some sort. This client had a diagnosis of polycystic ovarian syndrome. Now, when you understand PCOS, you understand all of the hormonal things, the blood sugar things, all of the different things that can go wrong that is out of balance in these people. So this young woman came to me. She was in her mid-20s. She was gaining weight. Her menstrual cycles were getting further and further apart. She had had one ectopic pregnancy with an emergency surgery to remove that fallopian tube because it was going to rupture. It was not pretty. And so when we look at her eyes, and she came to me afterwards, we see that she is what we call polyglandular, which means she's got a lot of lacunae in her eyes, and many of them are attached to the collarette. This suggests that she has an increased risk of blood sugar imbalances and hormonal imbalances. She was eating very, very poorly, a very junk food laden diet, and her menstrual cycles were getting further and further apart. So I want you to remember, as you look at this eye, remember what it looks like, because as we look at the next few eyes, they also were polycystic ovarian syndrome eyes. They are very different from this. But this eye has enough indicators with the lacunae that are attached to the collarette that it explained why this woman has PCOS. It doesn't tell me she has PCOS. There is not a marker or a set of markers in an eye that confirms PCOS for it, but for us, but it tells me why she got that diagnosis. Now I know the weight gain, I know the periods that are getting further and further apart are both hallmark indicators of PCOS, but the question was why. And so what we see here is that she's got lacunae in the right kinds of places to suggest a predisposition towards hormone and blood sugar imbalances. And that explains it, especially when we back that up against her diet. This is another one of my clients, a lovely woman, again in her mid-30s. She and her husband came to me. They wanted to conceive. They've been trying for about 3 years with no luck, not even a conception with a miscarriage. It was just all not working for them. And so she came to me, and as we were having that first appointment, I found out her cycles were 75 days apart. So already I'm thinking PCOS. She's slender. She's not gaining weight. She's actually quite petite. And I asked her then, has anyone ever suggested that you might have a blood sugar imbalance? And she said, yes, my doctor has said I'm type 2 diabetic. Very not classic type 2 diabetic with her body shape. And then I asked, has anyone ever suggested you might have PCOS? And she says, oh yeah, my doctor has suggested that, absolutely. So what do we see here? We've got these contraction furrows again that suggest that she burns through her B vitamins and vitamin C and calcium and magnesium very quickly. We also see that she's got the radial furrows that back that up as well. And so this suggests again that she might be low in Bs or might have problems working with her Bs. It suggests that when we put that with the fact that she's got hematogenic eyes, that she may also not be able to methylate her Bs properly. And so knowing these things about her, we made sure that we got her the methylated Bs. We started rejigging her diet. She's Asian, a first generation Canadian Asian. And what I find with my Asian clients is they typically keep the white rice from Asia and combine it with the absolute worst of what North America has to offer for diet. And so that's really hard because that's the perfect setup to become type 2 diabetic, whether you were supposed to or not, whether it was actually in your genes or not. And so what we did with this client is we straightened her diet around. She has a lovely husband. He was totally on board, came to every appointment with her, and they're both busy professionals. He said, you know, I will take over the cooking. I will make the time and the energy to make sure that we both eat the way she needs to eat so that we can have a baby. And I wanted to hug him. I was so impressed with his degree of support. What we found very quickly was that when we corrected the diet and put her B vitamins in the right form, we took just a few months to get her menstrual cycles down to 35 days. We got her exercising some because that's important as well. And they did succeed. They got pregnant, had a 7-pound baby boy, and a beautiful labor and delivery. She did not even develop gestational diabetes when she was pregnant, which is highly unusual for a type 2 diabetic. So we were very excited about that. She did come to me initially on metformin, and about halfway through the pregnancy, she had a conversation with her doctor and they stopped metformin because they did not feel she actually needed it anymore. She was regulating her blood sugars so very well. So do you see how different her eyes were from the previous set of eyes we looked at? And yet they both had PCOS. Here is yet another example of a young woman who came to me. She did not have a PCOS diagnosis, but she had all of the symptoms. 20 years old, gaining weight, and she'd been to the doctor and the doctor said, there's nothing wrong with you. I can't find anything wrong. And I'm thinking, you need to read some journals, right? Because at 20 years old, her periods had become 60 days apart. They were 8 weeks apart, and she had gained 20 pounds in the last 5 months. That's not normal. That is not normal. Now, she wasn't trying to get pregnant right away. She wanted to finish her university, and then she wanted to find a wonderful guy to get married to, and then she wanted to have a family. So she wasn't ready to do that just yet, but she figured out that there was something off base with her. Now, the thing that tipped me off here, her eyes are in many ways similar to the previous set of eyes we looked at. But when we look right here, we see something very unique. And you can see it on this blow up right here, where the fiber of the collarette is lifted right off the surface of the eye. This is a shadow from the light. And it's like we could slip a micro pin right under this. This is what we call a gateway arch. A gateway arch. And the gateway arch is a really, really strong indication that this person very likely is going to have some blood sugar issues if they don't already, right? This is an inherited sign, as are all the things we're looking at right now. And so it's not going to go away. We're not going to fix it. We need to take this as fair warning that this person is headed into a dangerous area with the blood sugars. So when I was working with this client, again, university student, tight budget, couldn't use supplements with her because there was no budget for that, but we could work with food, we could work with physical activity. We got those in place. She went back to university. I touched base with her a couple of months later by email. She said she had already lost 10 pounds in about 6 weeks, and that her menstrual cycle, her first cycle after we started working with her, was down to a 6-week cycle. So we were headed in the right direction. But again, we are looking at various markers to help us understand why the body is out of balance. And we are not assigning a diagnostic name to any of these. I did not tell any of these people they had PCOS. If they didn't offer that information, I would ask it as a question. Has anyone ever suggested to you that you have PCOS or that you have insulin resistance? I have not said you have these problems. I've asked if anyone has suggested that they have those problems. So in that way, we very carefully and very neatly avoid making a diagnosis that could land us in serious trouble. This is another one of my clients who has fertility challenges. She and her husband had tried for a full year to get pregnant with no luck. Now, they did discover that a part of the problem was her husband's sperm. He has an incredible sperm count, but he has a 0% normal morphology. He had that before we started working with him. So we worked with her because there were some warning signs for her as well. Things like her menstrual flow was almost nil. Like when she would have her period, it would be spotting. She wouldn't even wear a panty liner. Spotting when she wiped herself after using the bathroom. That was her menstrual flow for 2 days, spotting on the tissue. That's a problem. That says no endometrial lining is being established because it's not being shed, right? So we knew there were some hormonal issues there for her. She has a tiny marker in her eye, which you may or may not be able to see. And it's very, very, very small. It's right here. That little piece of pigment suggested to me that she might have the MTHFR defect. Now, I did not tell her she had that. And I'm going to build into that in just a moment. We finally did succeed in getting her pregnant. We got her to actually have a menstrual flow that required a light pad, which was brilliant. The flow would last for 2 days, which was brilliant. Then one day of very light spotting. So at least we knew we had an endometrial lining to work with now. And she did get pregnant, and partway through the pregnancy, she did the 23andMe testing. She sent me, she's a very anxious woman. Every little hiccup and fart, she sent me an email that was just vibrating with, oh my goodness, kind of energy. My job is to talk her down, to calm her down, to help her put things into perspective, right? And so she did 23andMe. She sent me another electric email where she said, oh my goodness, I have the MTHR defect. So she offered it to me, and she said, have I hurt my baby? Will my baby be okay? What is wrong? What do I need to do? Well, MTHFR defect is a genetic anomaly that affects about half of the North Americans, right? And so it's pretty common out there. But because I had seen that one little marker well before she got pregnant, like in our very first appointment together, I had dealt with that. Suspecting that she might have the MTHFR defect, I addressed that by making sure her prenatal vitamin had the B vitamins in the right format. So when I received this absolutely electric email from her, I was able to say, don't worry about it. We've had your back since day one. You've been on the right supplements for that. So your folate levels should be just fine. I am not concerned about it. And that really brought her down a level, which was fabulous. This next client, not a female and not trying to get pregnant, was a male who I've been working with for some time. I need to give you a little bit of background here. We have the liver that produces bile, and the bile is sent into the gallbladder, gets backwashed into the gallbladder for concentration. And then the bile, when we need it to emulsify fats in the small intestine, the bile comes down the common bile duct and is released through the Sphincter of Body. Have you ever heard of the Sphincter of Body before? If you have, let me know, put SOO in the message somewhere. Okay, and the reason I'm saying that is I've never heard of this before. I had no idea that we had a Sphincter of Body. So if you've heard of it, kudos to you. So this fellow came to me. I'd been working with him for many years, and as my clients do, we got him to a great point, and he didn't need to come back for a while, so disappeared for a couple of years. And then he came back to me. He said, I've got a problem. And I said, what's your problem? And he said, got this gut pain that is not going away. Oh, and by the way, I've had my gallbladder removed. And so I went, oh, that's interesting. You've had your gallbladder removed. And I said, so we took new pictures of his eyes, not that we expected them to change, but because I had a new camera. And so I wanted to see if the new camera had better resolution, better lighting to let me see any type of detail. So this is his right eye, and gallbladder is sitting right in here. This is the gallbladder reaction field. And of course, we don't see anything that says he's had surgery because surgery does not show up in the eye. We don't see anything in here that says there's even an issue with the gallbladder, because in his case, the gallbladder problem was rooted in emotion, not in a physical problem. So when we see that we cannot see Sphincter of Body here, we cannot see gallbladder here, what we know is that for this gentleman, his predisposition to gallbladder was not a physical thing, it was a mental emotional thing. We know that gallstones are the result of unresolved anger that we've swallowed, and that anger goes to the gallbladder and it creates ulcers in the gallbladder, and the body sends in the minerals that coalesce the bile to try to soothe the irritations. So this fellow is one of the nicest guys you'd ever care to meet. Happily married for like 4 decades, maybe even more than that, and totally understand why his wife adores him. He's very patient, he's very soft-spoken, very congenial, just a really nice human being. He works in an industry that is nasty, that has a lot of underhanded things going on, and he needs to call people to task. That is a part of his job, which means he is constantly the human dartboard. People are always firing things at him, and he swallows it. And that anger builds up. It ate away at his gallbladder and led to the gallstones. And so we could not see anything in here. We're not diagnosing gallbladder, we're not diagnosing gallstones. Those will not show up in the eye because for him, the gallbladder problem was not an inherent physiological problem. Gallstones do not change our metabolism. They don't change how your cells work. So we're not going to see an indicator in the eyes for that. All right, so it's also important to know, if you know anyone who's had their gallbladder removed, that sphincter of Body dysfunction, which is what he had, where the sphincter of Body began to spasm after the gallbladder was removed, and is a very, very common problem with gallbladder removal. So if you're working with anyone who's had their gallbladder removed, they've got persistent pain in the region of the gallbladder, that is likely a sphincter of Body dysfunction. Not that you can diagnose that, but you can certainly send your person to online resources for them to do the research themselves, and possibly suggest they talk to their doctor to ask questions about, could this be a sphincter of Body dysfunction? So where does that leave us? It honestly doesn't matter whether you're a herbalist, a nutrition coach, a aromatherapist, and in many places a naturopath. We don't want to ever use iridology as a diagnostic tool. Now, I know in many places naturopaths are considered first-line medical care, and they are allowed to make diagnoses, they are allowed to run medical tests and so on, and that's great. But we never want to use iridology as the diagnostic tool. It is an assessment tool. It gives us information. When we understand what the eyes are telling us, that helps us to know what questions to ask, to dive deeper with our clients, to understand more about what the problem is and where it is originating from. This is so, so important. We need to avoid looking at eyes like this and assigning a problem to each mark we see, because each of these is only an inherent indicator, not an indication of a current pathological problem. Each of these on its own does not indicate anything. It is the understanding of these in conjunction with other marks that we see in the eyes, and with symptoms, and with diet, and with lifestyle, and with emotional health, that helps us to understand how to assess what we see. Is this making sense? Does that make sense to you? If that makes sense, give me a yes in the chat or the comments box. So, so important. All righty. So this brings me to one of my pet peeves, and that pet peeve is this. That pet peeve is people who post their eye photos on social media. Well, that's not the pet peeve. The pet peeve is the people who jump in to give these long lists of markers that they see, problems that they think they see, what needs to be done about it. Because when practitioners, whether they actually have valid training or not, present these long lists, they do the person a tremendous disservice. The lists are so long that the client doesn't know where to begin. Most of what's on that list is not going to be an active problem right now and does not need addressing. The eyes haven't told us about the person's diet, their lifestyle, their mental status, their stresses. And so when we see these long lists of symptoms and these long lists of what you can do about it, it only serves to overwhelm the client, and it often serves to give iridology a bad name. Iridology is not a crystal ball. It is not a party game. It is an assessment tool. So the answer to the question of, is iridology a diagnostic tool? The answer is no. It is an assessment tool. We cannot diagnose anything from the eyes. And we need to remember that iridology helps us understand the possibilities of what can go on in the body. Iridology helps to give us the questions to ask, but we have to have a base. We have to know what the client is concerned about as well. On their own, we cannot name a disease. We cannot even make a recommendation based on what we see just in the eyes. We need to remember that our scope of practice as iridologists is to assess and to recommend. It is not to diagnose or to prescribe. So iridology is an assessment tool. It points the way to the questions we should ask. It guides us in our dietary and herbal and whatever other recommendations. And it shows us what the genetic potential is for the organ, for the system, or the body. It does not serve as a diagnostic thing. So going back to the beginning of this little web class, if you've been hanging out with me for any length of time, you know that I have a strong passion for teaching and mentoring practitioners. And I also want to help people understand the truth and the best, most recently researched information about iridology. So for the past several years, I've been teaching wellness practitioners the art and science of constitutional iridology. With your permission, I'd like to take just a moment to introduce the program to you. Seriously, it's going to take me about 2 minutes. Dynamic Iridology Assessment System is the only live online course for nutritionists, herbalists, and naturopaths who want to streamline their clinical work without sacrificing client care. I find that too many practitioners see the client for the first time, then they go off and on their own time, they create a protocol, and then they bring that back to the client at a later date. But they're not getting paid for the time they spent creating the protocol. When we practice dynamic iridology the way I teach it, you design the protocol while you are with the client. You eliminate your unpaid overtime. And what that means is you actually create a program that is succinct enough, that is simple enough that your client can actually follow it and can get the results you've promised. You're not giving them a program that is going to last them the rest of their life. You're giving them a program that will bump their health up one notch, that is dealing with a critical symptom they have right now that they want to have resolved. And you're just taking them up one notch, and you're telling them you're taking them up just one notch. You're telling them what that one notch is going to look like so that they know what to expect out of the next 3 to 4 weeks. And then you're inviting them to come back to learn what the next step is based on the progress they've made. No more creating programs on your own time. No more overwhelming your clients. No more clients dropping off super quickly because the program was too hard and they can't do it. No more having to do free phone calls in between appointments to explain and describe and reteach your client what you thought you taught them in the first appointment. So the goal of the Dynamic Iridology Assessment System is to teach you constitutional iridology and how to use it confidently so that you can easily integrate it with what you already know about nutrition and herbology to confidently create doable client sessions or client programs in your paid client sessions. The next course date is Thursday, September 9th. I know that sounds like a long ways away. If you would like to be notified when registration is open to the public, please just shoot me a PM with your email address. I will add you to the database and get you into the email loop so that you we'll know when we've got promotional webinars happening, and you'll know how to get registered for the course. That is all I have for you today. Is there anything I can answer for you? Is there anything that I can help you with at this point in time? Give you about 30 seconds to type anything you need to into the chat box or into the comments box, depending on whether you're with me on Instagram or sorry, yeah, on Instagram. Yes, that's where we're at, or on the webinar. And just thank you so much for spending this last 40 minutes with me. I have really appreciated your time, and I look forward to seeing you again next Thursday for another webinar and to introduce you to more great concepts about using iridology in your practice. Have a fabulous day, and we will talk to you soon. Remember to send me your email address if you would like to be notified of the next registration opening. Bye for now.